meeting. I'll start by recognizing that we are on the unceded territories of the Comox First Nation. And I'd actually like to see if the Commission's interested in varying the agenda to put under reports the Area B Director participation right at the front, so we can decide if maybe the Director can participate in the whole meeting. Do we have a mover for that?
I'll move it.
And seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, so we'll move on to reports. If someone wouldn't mind moving that report.
Second.
And would you like to speak to this, staff or CO, or does anyone have any thoughts or comments on it off the top of their head?
Yeah, so this relates to the direction provided for staff to bring this forward, and it would be a policy to apply. James Warren, General Manager of Corporate Services, has presented the brief report and policy for your consideration and is available to answer any questions.
And I'll also point out that the report does provide some guidance around how the Area B Director would participate in our meetings, and that's under on the second page, or is it on the? Actually, it's on this. Yeah, it's on the second page under guiding principles and roles and responsibilities. So the gist of it is that the Director would participate in discussions around reports, but not in discussions around motions and resolutions. Was anyone interested in moving the recommendation? Oh, I'm sorry, we're still on receipt, of course. Okay, I don't see any questions on receipt, so all those in favor? And that was unanimous. Is someone interested in moving the recommendation?
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Director Arnott. Thank you. Are there any thoughts? Yeah, let me give you the mic there.
Yeah, just to make a point that Mr. Warren did an excellent job in his report, and you know, I was on the fence before, but after reading that, it was very thoughtful, and it made me think that this is the best way forward. So good on him.
Yeah, and I appreciate the Commission taking time to think this through, and I know we've been under a fair bit of pressure to make a decision, but I think we're looking at making a wise one. So. I'll call the question then if there's no more comments. All in favor? And that's unanimous. So we'd invite the Director up to the table to join us for the meeting, and I guess, can she pick her own seat? Yeah. Her usual is fine. Wonderful, and so today we have a delegation with us. Jenny Steeles is here to present for this, is it the CRRA? Is that your short acronym? CRRA. Right. Well, welcome, and
oh, great, thanks. You got me down pat now.
Yeah, we've got it. We got it figured out. It's all yours. You have 10 minutes as usual.
Thanks. Good afternoon again.
Oh, let me put your podium on. Sorry.
Okay. We're here right now to give you an update on the EQ Basin, which is what we advertised this delegation, but also a fair amount of feedback to you on the bioreactor odor issue. On the EQ Basin, there's still a couple of things that we're working on with Chris, but the one outstanding concern we have is obviously odor. The picture on the right, it doesn't really show you how big I tried to get a sense of how big this basin is. It's bigger than the clarifiers and the bioreactors combined. It's huge. I mean, when you look at it, it's just huge. When it's in use, it's going to be filled with primary effluent. The recent odor modeling showed that the effluent, when it enters the bioreactors, gives off more than 5,000 odor units. That's more than any other source in the entire plant. So what is going into there is, under normal circumstances, be very, very odorous. But in this case, it will be diluted. By how much? Who knows? Our community obviously has a problem with this much volume in our backyards. We did ask for odor modeling, but the staff refused to do that. There are two reports that gave heads up on potential odor issues. The first recommended a covered tank. The second, that was produced when the basin was moved to the buffer zone, showed odor as a potential issue. Our question to you is simple. What's your plan if it stinks out our neighborhood? Or is it your expectation that we suck it up and move to hotels? What do you think we should be doing here? Moving on, the main item for us today is obviously a response to the bioreactor odors. We brought this to you in April, and you had made decisions in May to move forward by doing some more odor modeling to determine if your 2008 controls had effectively reduced the odors by 80%. You'd also asked staff to update the cost estimates. At that point, you seemed to accept our complaints, along with the scientific proof from the odor models, firmly established that we have a major problem. And you seemed concerned enough to do something about it. It appears, though, from the staff report we just received, that the goalposts have shifted. The decision now also relies on selecting a defensible odor standard. Is the one odor unit standard you used to make your 2017 decision to spend $2 million no longer valid or defensible? Or are you shopping for another one to support a decision to do nothing? Was the 2018 investment effective? CVRD spent $62,000 with RWDI this summer on odor sampling and modeling. They measured the bioreactors on 3 separate occasions, taking a total of 15 samples. The September 19th samples were used for the modeling. Those particular samples were only taken when our members pointed out that evening samples were needed because that's when the stink happens. Why we should need to point this out is beyond our comprehension. All other samples had been taken in the morning, when typically there's no problem. Staff claims on page 2 of their report that decreases in odor were roughly in line with the 2016 projections. But the table in the report on page 4, extracted to the right there on that slide, and we've put the percentage reduction, clearly shows that nothing like 80% was achieved. Do the math yourself. The number was 47%. The bioreactor odors increased by 31% from their 2016 measurement. This could have been because of the time of the samples. I haven't had the chance to dig deeper. This odor modeling happened after the berms were put across the gullies. These results certainly explain what happens in the neighborhood. At Ian and Kathy's house, at the end of the street, those are sensitive receptors 2, 3, and 4, the additional odor control only got rid of 1/3 of the problem. This explains Kathy's surprise that she hadn't noticed any significant change after last year's upgrades. The smell still wakes her up, and she has to close her windows. Staff propose yet more odor sampling and modeling of the bioreactors. Why? Neither RWDI or ISL recommended more sampling and modeling, and staff have given no explanation in any of their reports. The 2017 and 19 results provide the scientific evidence to support our claim that your plant stinks. Another study is simply kicking the can down the road. Updated cost estimates. Staff had engaged ISL to provide cost estimates, and their scope included to develop more treatment options if feasible. They looked at 3 different technologies. Their recommendation of their result of $8.4 million would put in place the odor control infrastructure required until 2066, 46 years. Staff statement on page 2 that none of the other plants in BC cover their bioreactors is incorrect and misleading. We took a closer look at the 12 plants they had surveyed. 8 are located in rural or industrial areas with no residential units on or close to the property line. Hence, it's highly likely that there's no need to cover. 2 have secondary treatment processes that are not comparable. One, French Creek, is located in an urban area, but they obviously have problems too, and have committed to $33 million upgrade with a focus on odor control. McLaughlin Point and the new North Vancouver plant are completely covered. Covering the source and treating foul air appears to be the accepted way to solve odor problems. If there was a silver bullet, then surely one of the engineering companies would have found it by now. Why yet another study? Again, simply kicking the can down the road. Is the Commission prepared to find $8.4 million to solve this problem if that's what it takes? We need a decision from you now, as you had promised. This is a 45-year investment taking you out to 2066. That's only $188,000 a year on a $7 million a year operating budget, and less than $5 per user per annum, less than 2 cans of Febreze. To put this in perspective, you've just put $7.6 million to expand the composting facility. You had approved $7.1 million for the EQ Basin, and CVRD had provided $9 million for the Cumberland Host Community benefit. Savings from moving the EQ Basin into our backyards has been more than $3 million. Why can't you use that to offset this expense? Moving on to the odor standard. A lot of the report looks at what other provinces and jurisdictions are doing re odor standards. While this is useful information, selecting a local odor standard should be based on avoiding nuisance to your neighbours, avoiding bylaw complaints, avoiding nuisance lawsuits, and meeting EPA legislation. We had requested the adoption of the Ontario standard because it had been agreed to by this commission in 2017 when staff misled commissioners that the 2018 upgrades would meet that standard. Staff survey of 12 BC plants support the one on odor unit standard. 5 of the plants have as a goal minimally detectable or no odors at all at the nearest sensitive receptors. We're a sensitive receptor, along with a 5 odor unit design limit at the property line. While they've not put an odor unit value on minimally detectable, we would suggest that the Ontario standard of 1 odor unit is equivalent. The 5 odor unit design limit provides a margin to deal with abnormal situations, such as an equipment or power failure that might cause elevated odors. I had laid the distinctions here out in an email to you all a couple of days ago. Unfortunately, the staff report does not make these distinctions plain and might lead commissioners to think that there's some kind of choice to be made between 5, 2, or 1, when that's not the case. If CVRD wants to set a standard of minimally detectable odors in our backyards, along with a design limit of 5 odor units to allow for abnormal conditions, then that's fine with us. But then we'd simply argue about what means minimally detectable. The 1 odor unit simply puts a value on that minimally detectable.
How many slides do you have left?
Just a couple.
Okay, because you have about a minute left.
I'm going to go over.
Okay, well,
I have gone under on some, and this is, and I'd ask for your patience here. This is our big bugaboo here, and I'd ask for more time.
we should probably just get the commission's permission because it's.
I'd like to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been waiting for 9 months for this, so.
Could we extend the delegation an extra couple minutes? Would that be fair? I see one nodding head. Sure. Okay. Well, just on the basis of that, we'll just go ahead and give you a couple extra minutes.
Thank you very
If
much.
you don't mind respecting that, that'd be great.
Where was I? Okay, I'll skip a bit here. Okay, sorry. Kelowna has 5 odor units design limit and no sensitive receptor guideline. According to their annual report, they haven't received any complaints at all about odors. 5 of those plants are out in the boonies and haven't set any standards. And again, there's French Creek, who's planning their $33 million upgrade. Vancouver and Victoria have guaranteed no odor at those new plants, just like you did in 1983. Staff failed to cite RWDI's conclusion in the cross-country survey report that the Ontario guideline does have a quantifiable evaluation process that the other jurisdictions do not have. This quantifiable guideline is probably the best approach for design evaluation from a due diligence standpoint. Flip the slide, please. I won't go into this because you saw it, but I'll go to the picture to save time. This is McLaughlin Point. The blue blob there is the plant and defines the edges of the plant. Their standard or their design limit is 5 odor units. But this is what they have at the edge of the plant is 2 odor units. As you move out, you can see that the odor units decrease, and all of them, except for an industrial complex at 1.4, which are the nearest sensitive receptors, are less than 1, the Ontario standard. So finally, to conclude, the path ahead recommended by our staff is not acceptable to us. Changing the goalposts and kicking the can down the road is not adequate, and we've run out of patience. Old and new odor models provide the scientific data to back up our numerous complaints. Old and new engineering studies support covering the bioreactors. Staff's own research supports the Ontario standard of minimally detectable odors at sensitive receptors. We want a decision now, one way or the other. We need a commitment from you that you'll find the capital required to fix this problem and do it ASAP, as soon as possible. If we don't hear from you by November 15th, then you leave us no choice but to take our campaign to the next level. This will include no longer registering our complaints at your website, where they never are responded to or reported on. We will lodge formal bylaw complaints against your facility. We will also lodge complaints with provincial regulatory authorities. We'll extend our press coverage, and we'll start concrete preparations for legal action against you. Decide now, one way or the other. You've got until November 15th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Steele. And I see Director Hamir would like to ask a question, or speak.
Thanks, and thanks for everyone's permission for me to be at the table. I have quite a few questions, but I'm wondering if asking the questions that kind of relate to
Are the questions
item
for
number 3.
staff or for
Well,
the delegation?
They were mostly, there's a couple for staff, and then there was one for the delegate.
Okay, well, why don't we do the delegations ones now, and then for staff, we'll just ask them when we get into the reports.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
So I wanted, if Jenny wouldn't mind to elaborate. She made a comment that we're a sensitive receptor. So if she could explain what that means in terms of where the odor unit lines are. And
Maybe flip back to the McLaughlin plant site, just so people understand this. The Ontario standard is 1 odor unit at the closest sensitive receptor, which is essentially people. Mm-hmm. They could be far from a plant, or a plant could be located where there's people close by on the property line, as is the case with our plant. We're on the property line, but we're a sensitive receptor. So that standard is 1 odor unit at the closest sensitive receptors. In the case of the McLaughlin plant, the closest sensitive receptors are quite a ways away, as you can see. You know, they're on a point. There are there's no properties on their fence line, and so that distance between closest sensitive receptors gives the opportunity for odors to dissipate, and that's what typically plants do when they do odor modeling to predict that dissipation. So again, we are sensitive receptors. Our homes are sensitive receptors. As you can see in the odor modeling report, should you have chosen to
if I
to
could
read
ask a subsequent, how far are you from the property line?
We're on the property line. Our property's back onto the property line of the plant.
So, like, is it?
We're on the
tens of
property
feet,
line,
Right.
and sensitive receptors are the same thing
Okay.
for this plant.
So what you're asking for is a level of 1 odor unit at
Right.
the property line, because
Correct.
that is your sensitive, like that's where you
That's
are.
where the sensitive receptors are.
Okay. Thank you.
And we also have a question from Director Arnott.
Yeah, I guess to Jenny, one of the reports we saw was, you know, the complaints that had come in, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate on why, with one house that has the most complaints out of everybody, right beside there's no complaints.
Okay.
The other side of that, I think there was minimal complaints, and then 2 doors down, there's some complaints. 3 doors down, there's no complaints. It just seems to be all over. And
Sorry, if the gallery could just leave it up to the delegation
Yeah.
to do. Thanks
So,
very much.
so that's my question. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there's a few reasons, and Peter's right. Number one is that there's a lot of people that we have quite a number of cabins that they're only occupied in the summer. There's a couple of houses where there's nobody there. The second thing is what we found is a lot of people have simply given up complaining. Why would they complain? And that goes for a lot of people on our street. They have been complaining for years, and our complaints go into a black hole. We get no feedback whatsoever. The third thing is, though, I dug around when they were going through the court case in the 90s. Odor apparently is like that. Sometimes it finds its paths. This was a report from some expert from the States, that odor is strange. It can kind of miss some houses and it can get other ones. So there is some of that going on too. And I can dig out that report if anybody wants it, but it was kind of interesting. So yeah, there are those of us who have said we want this fixed, and to a certain extent, the rest of the community are relying on certain individuals, like I at my end of the street, and Kathy and Ian at the other end of the street. But actually, if you could flip back to the was the 2018 investment effective? You can see there that the odor models. See, if you look, the odor units, they vary along the street. Our street is represented here by sensitive receptor 2 to 8. So you can see there is some difference there, like sensitive receptor 4, which I believe is approximately by Ian's house. He didn't see too much reduction from your changes, whereas other other receptors did. That's the nature of it. Does that explain?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the presentation, Jenny. And I don't see any more questions. If we could have a move for receipt here. And all in favor? Thanks very much. And we'll move on to Section C, Management Reports. Someone like to move? Thanks very much. Excellent. Does anyone have any questions on the management report? Would you like to speak to it?
Chair, if you, Commissioners, Chris LaRose is here just to provide an update on a couple of items on the management report, including the equalization basin. And he can also answer any of your questions that you have on any other items.
Excellent.
Thank you, Russell, through the chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Jake's just going to pull up a brief presentation that I've put together, mostly just to show you some photos. We've taken the step of providing an update through the management report, just because this is a hot topic, and so we'll provide through these photos an update on where the construction of this infrastructure is at. Yeah, so the back one. So the project started earlier this year with the intention of being completed before the storm season started. So there have been a couple of delays, but the project is well along towards completion, and we're hoping to have it commissioned in early December. So these photos show top left towards the start of construction, where the hole is just starting to be dug. Top right, several weeks later, after most of the excavation is complete, and the majority, almost all of the fill that was excavated from that location, which is in this area, is almost pure sand, was used to construct the berm around the backside. And then the bottom here, after the construction or the excavation was complete and all the compaction done, the double layer membrane liner of the basin was installed, and then anchored in an anchor trench around the exterior of the basin. I think this in the foreground here is the one of the standpipes for water that are located at several locations around the basin, and those will be used to provide the water to the large diameter hose that'll be used to clean out that basin after every use. In no particular order, some more photos from the construction. So after that basin had been finished being completed, being dug, the spoils were used to build the berms, And then the planting was located on top here. So that was per the landscape plan that was developed and shared with the local residents for their feedback in the summer. The plants do look fairly small right now, but we're confident they'll grow fairly quickly come the start of next year's growing season. And the berms themselves have been coated or lined with a mesh product that's built out of coconut husks that helps to stabilize that berm, and hydro seed will be spread over top of that for to have grass grow on it. On the right is one of the 2 groundwater monitoring wells that have been installed on the downhill side of the EQ basin. And those are being used to establish a baseline of groundwater quality in the area and will be used to monitor for groundwater quality moving forward, particularly if the leak detection system indicates that there may have been a compromise, that the membrane could have been compromised. Speaking of leak detection here, this slide shows some of the key components. So the decision was made partway through the process to amend the scope of the project to install a double membrane instead of a single layer. And so this is 2 layers of HDPE membrane with a layer of geotextile in between, which effectively acts to hold the 2 layers of membrane apart and will allow, if there is any type of penetration or failure of a seal, will allow water or the effluent inside to travel between those 2 layers to a low point, which is down here located at a sump. And this manhole right here, which is just behind this fence here, will be a location where staff will, during and after use of the basin, will check for the presence of fluid in that sump. So that's the leak detection system. And just a final 2 photos here showing tidying up of the exterior of the berm. So it's taken over the last few days. So the project is nearing completion. Here is a photo of the manifold within the basin, which unfortunately cut off on the left here are the 3 pump mounts. And so those 3 large pumps will form the big pushing power to get the primary effluent out of that basin in a hurry. Once the tides have fallen during a peak rain event, and we're able to get the water out the outfall. And then the small sump on the right here is effectively where the pumps that finish emptying the basin. So those large pumps that cut off when the level gets to a certain level, and then the staff will come out, spray down the basin, and that water will get pumped out of those smaller pumps. So we're just a final slide remaining, sort of task remaining before completion. Getting those the pumps all finalized and commissioned, the electrical kiosk installed, PLC all programmed and in place. The final stairway into the basin for safety reasons and for maintenance. One of the longest lead time items has turned out to be the slide gates, and those will be the the gates that control the flow of primary effluent into the basin. So when we experience peak flow events, those slide gates will be opened, allow flow into the basin, and then closed when appropriate. So those ones are expected at the end of the month, and that's the only thing really that's holding up commissioning, which we're expecting by early December, and hoping that the big rains hold off until then. That's it for the update. I'd be happy to answer any questions on this one or any of the other management items.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate the update, and we do have a question from Director Hamir.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Chris, and I'm wondering if you can answer this. Once the EQ basin is commissioned, I'm assuming that the actual use of it will happen when king tides are. Is that when you're expecting that the EQ basin might have to be used? We have a high rain event in conjunction with the king tide.
Those are the most likely instances where it would be used.
Do you have an idea when that next one might happen?
So the king tides occur in December.
Yeah.
And so it's only during a confluence of a peak rain event and a king tide where this infrastructure will be used. And actually, in fact, it's not only during king tides. There could be other
rain.
confluence of high rain events and just high tides. But the king tides are the ones where we've had biggest problems with in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, so that could be as early December. So we're
Early December?
Yeah.
Okay. And that would happen like twice a month, like having that high tide, or is it possible to have
no. I
it
mean, there's
more?
periods in December where it's occurring almost every day.
Okay.
So it's only when we happen to have a peak storm event that is peaking during the high tide period.
Okay.
Yeah. So the analysis that we undertook to size this infrastructure indicated that that is on the order of dozens of hours per year where this infrastructure could be called into service.
And then could you explain the cleaning out system? Because is it literally someone with a hose washing it down?
Yeah, so it's a combination of somebody with a hose, an operator with a hose. There's several standpipes that are located around the perimeter of the basin. So they'll take a large diameter line out there with a high-speed nozzle on it, and they'll just basically flush the sides of the unit down into the base while the pumps are running. The smaller pumps at that point will have been emptied of as much primary effluent as possible through the large diameter pumps. The operators will wash out the sides as the small pumps are running, and then as those pumps drain and slurp up the last little bit, the operators will be spraying and
Is that
ensuring
a
that it all
one
is
person
left.
or a multiple person job?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it would be faster, more quickly done with more than one, but one person could easily accomplish it.
Okay. Great. Thank
And
you.
You're welcome.
yeah, good questions. And all the debris that ends up in there, does it just get pumped out as well and gets treated or whatever?
That's right.
And how tough is that, the EPDM or EDPM or whichever it was called?
It's very tough.
Yeah.
We have a existing effluent storage basin with a single layer of that material, and it's maintained its integrity since the plant was built 40 years ago.
It's exposed to the sun, or is it coated?
It's exposed to the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we took the additional step of adding the second layer and the leak detection system because of the significant concern from the neighbors. And at that point in the contract, it seemed like a fairly cost-effective thing to do, but that does provide a significantly increased level of confidence.
Right.
Yeah.
That seems wise. Thanks.
Yeah.
Chris, I don't see any more questions or comments, so thanks very much for
Great.
the report on that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And we are on receipt, so all those in favor of receipt, thank you very much. That's unanimous. And we will move on to, well, we'll skip, we'll go to D, number 2, Comox Valley Sewage Management Advisory Committee minutes. Thanks very much. Are there any questions or comments on those? I don't see any. All those in favor of receipt? And that's unanimous. Moving on to number 3, the Comox Valley Water Pollution Control Center odor control measures. Great, and would staff like to talk to this?
Yep, Chris LaRose will come back and give a summary of the report and answer any of your questions.
Excellent.
Thank you, Russell. Through the chair. Again, we've prepared a brief presentation to help me kind of guide you through the report. So this work was originally scheduled to be brought back to you in September, but the odor sampling and dispersion modeling took significantly longer than anticipated. And even now, I know that many were expecting us to be bringing forward a solid or firm recommendation on any further odor control measures required at the plant. But these are this is a big decision for the service, and we're with both short and significant long-term implications. So based on the analysis we've completed to date, which I'll summarize in this presentation, we feel strongly that that further work is warranted before confirming a path forward. So first of all, starting off with the recommendations. So one is that we undertake further research regarding other jurisdictions in BC to gain confidence in the concept of establishing a standard at the plant. Second of all, that we undertake additional odor sampling to build a larger data set to help us to fine-tune the model and provide a model with with an appropriate level of conservatism. The third is that we undertake we revise or review the options analysis to ensure that we haven't missed an alternative technology that could more cost effectively allow us to meet an acceptable or reduce odors at the facility. And last, that we be directed to draft work with the CRRA to draft a good neighbor agreement. So starting at the beginning with the cost of covering bioreactors. So one of the elements that we indicated we were going to go away and study was the revising the capital costs associated with covering the bioreactors and the associated infrastructure. So in 2016, ISL had estimated that the cost of covering the bioreactors and the associated infrastructure was approximately $3 million. So fast forward 3 years, and the same company is now estimating that cost at $8.5 million. So the biggest factor by far is is just construction cost escalation, which we're seeing across the board, and by some accounts is approaching, that 1% per month, which we've seen on a number of projects. We've also this is also a much more detailed estimate. It has a fleshed out concept that would provide, as indicated by Jenny in her presentation, would provide coverage, air handling capacity through approximately 45 years to well into the 2060s. And we've also been able to benefit from the competitive pricing that we've obtained over the last year and a half as we've developed or undertaken the latest phase of odor upgrades at the facility. So given that much higher than anticipated cost, we are proposing to review the options analysis and determine if there are any other alternatives that could allow us to further reduce odors from the facility at a lower cost. So the dispersion modeling. So the results, so what we said we were going to do here was go away and essentially repeat the study work that was originally done in 2016 that led to the recommendation or the scenarios for reducing odor at the facility. Repeat that work both to assess the performance of the work that had been done in 2018 and also to help inform a path forward. So the conclusions from the model is that there definitely was a significant reduction in odor since 2016. The percentage of reduction depends on which set of samples taken this year you're comparing it to. So as highlighted in an earlier presentation, there were several sets of samples taken this year. The first set was taken in June, and due to a communication error with the consultant, only the entry to the bioreactors were sampled, compared to 2016, where the inlet, the midpoint, and the outlet of each bioreactor was sampled. So that set of samples was effectively put aside. The next set of samples was taken in very early September, roughly the same time of year as the samples in 2016, and at the same time of day. So the explanation for why samples were taken in late morning is because those the sampling involves taking a volume of air off of these emission points at the plant and sending that to a panel of odor experts, an odor panel in East North America. So, and that has to occur within a 24-hour period. So that's what has driven the time of day sampling in the past. When we received the feedback from the CRRA that pointing out legitimately that the complaints largely come in the evening, we asked RWA to come back. So they came back in late September and undertook a round of samples in the evening. And to do that, there was a more expensive sample. They had to essentially have somebody take the sample in the evening, go on the red-eye flight back east, and actually personally courier it to the odor panel. Again, once we'd worked out those logistics, that was a viable thing to do. So in terms of the ability to compare or measure the percent reduction against 2016, our position is that would definitely be looking at the early September readings that were the similar time of day, because that legitimate point of being a more odorous wastewater in the evening highlights the apples to oranges type of comparison. So when we do that, the percent reductions are closer to what was projected in 2016 by RWDI.
Chris, what are we looking at in this diagram here?
So this is one of the outputs, one of the types of outputs from the dispersion modeling. So there was a question earlier about the sensitive receptors. So sensitive receptors are typically homes where people are spending
Right.
their
see
time,
that now,
homes or
yeah.
businesses. In this case, there are no businesses nearby, so they're homes. So these are essentially the closest homes to the facility. With the exception of a number of these here, where we've added points along the property line, and that was in light of the fact that some jurisdictions do speak to odor levels at the property line. We thought that those results would be useful to help us make a decision. So, what this is showing is that these are concentration levels, so essentially plume directions. So the model takes the measured odor emissions from the various points in the plant, inputs it into a numerical model that runs a full year's worth of climactic data, and then predicts the highest levels or highest concentrations of odor for the sensitive receptors. So what you're seeing here, this shape here, is the shape of a 5 odor unit kind of contour. So inside of that, in that dark brown, is where you could expect the odors currently, with the abated with the abatements we installed last year, where that five odor unit line would be
Okay, thanks.
during those worst times of the year. So what the model also concluded, both, and that's what, as I've just described here, that there are exceedances over 5 odor units at several of the sensitive receptors, and it concluded that reaffirmed, I guess, supported the conclusions from the 2016 study that covering the bioreactors would allow the facility to, or that would reduce the odor concentrations to below 1 odor unit at the property line. Just bear with me. So I guess the other point I wanted to make was just the small sample size. So in the report, Table 1, we highlight the results from the samples taken in 2016, the 2016, the single sample taken in June of 2019, early September, and late September. So for the last two, we did sample 2 separate bioreactors. Previously, there was just a single bioreactor sampled. So by all accounts, this is a very small sample size. I think we've seen relatively consistent numbers across, they're within the same order of magnitude, which is reassuring as far as the methodology goes, but it is still a very small sample size. And the way that the dispersion model works in terms of combining that small sample size with a full year of climatic data effectively is comparing or combining the samples taken at arguably one of the highest odor times of the year with a full year's worth of data, climatic data, and effectively combining it with the worst climatic conditions. So what we're recommending here is that additional sampling and modeling be done to provide a more realistic model, and that would include some additional samples taken in the off season when, so in November, December, to add to that analysis. We think that will provide a more robust result. And just a note regarding why the EQ basin, which is located approximately right here, why that was not included in the modeling, because the basin will be used, on the order of dozens of hours per year. I think we're predicting a maximum of 50 hours per year, and scattered throughout, certain days within December, January. Following the same type of process of combining those results with a whole year's worth of climactic data would be very almost certain to generate a completely unrealistic combination of odor and weather, which was the reason, combined with the fact that it is just a number of hours here and there during high tides, and it'll be washed out and not odorous the rest of the time, was the reason we opted to not direct RWDI to model the odor from that infrastructure.
Would you be willing to take a question here from
Sure.
Director Swift?
Thank you, Chris. Could we just go back to that slide again? Thank you. I just want to confirm I'm understanding this correctly. The 5 odor units are the dark brown area, is that correct?
That's correct.
So the ones beyond that are less than that?
Yes.
So there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's about 6 or 7 within that 5 odor unit?
Yeah, and three or four of those are the property line. So
Okay.
so there is a difference between the property line and the sensitive receptors. I mean, it's true that the property line is shared with the facility, but generally the houses along that area are 10, 20, 30 meters or 20 meters from the property line. So, and that is reflected by the precise location of those sensitive receptors. So most of those, many of those that fall within the 5 odor unit plume are the property lines rather than the homes.
Okay, thank you.
And the light colored brown or orange?
So I believe this is the threshold between 1 odor unit and so that's the 1 odor unit line, that's the 5.
Right.
Yeah.
And the white in the middle is just no data?
That's the plant, the facility itself.
Right.
Yeah.
And Director Grant?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if one OU is detectable by 50% of the people, I'm struggling with the ratio of where 5 gets you to. And I guess I'm trying to find something that would be relative. Like on Halloween night, we live right by Guthrie Road, and they put manure all over the farms, and it was really ripe out there. But I don't know what that is. Like, that could be 5, that could be 500. So if it's barely detectable at 1, I don't know what 5 actually smells like, I guess, and I'm not sure how to quantify that.
No, it's a good question, and I don't have an easy answer for you. Just for example, some of the literature published by the Capital Regional District as part of their odor commitments or explanation to the public and decision makers had some, so anecdotally had some information there about the strength of smell of, say, cut grass, freshly cut grass, freshly spread mulch, those types of odors ranging between 7 to 15 or 20 odor units. So if you can, that provides a little bit of quantification. So that was a 2-page pamphlet provided by, circulated by the Capital Regional District and provided by Jenny Steele in an email late last week. We could circulate that.
Okay, if you don't mind, that
or
would be
bring
good.
that back as context
Yeah.
when we come back in January.
Good, thanks.
And we have a question from Director Cole Hamilton, who, by the way, is now sitting in the place of Director Hillian, for those of you who weren't up on the change from Courtney. So sorry for the late welcome, Director Cole Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair Frisch. I was just following up on Director Grant's question. I was wondering, is there a numerical point at which, if 1 is where 50% of people are able to detect the threshold for 50%, is there a number at which 100% of people are, just for reference, able to detect?
Yeah, I don't have that information, but we could bring that back as context.
Yeah, I would echo Director Grant's comments. It would be very helpful to have some more tangible references for what these numbers mean.
Thank
and I was also going to ask, the green area, is that where it's 0? And then what is the kind of cream-colored area?
Yeah, the cream-colored area is lower than 1 and higher than 0, I guess. I don't know exactly, but that the dark line is 5, the medium amber line is 1, and I think that's no detectable beyond the any color.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for answering those questions, Chris.
Okay. So the third piece of analysis that we indicated we would do when we committed to you earlier this year was looking at well, reporting back, I guess, on the concept of setting a standard at the facility. And so what we did is we did a preliminary look at well, there's two attachments actually to your report. The first one is a review done by RWDI of standards set across, provincial standards set across the country. And then the other is a review of the 10 or so largest wastewater treatment plants from the 10 or so largest communities in BC, looking at what they have in place, whether they have an odor standard in place, and a high level at what odor control mechanisms they have in place. So what that concluded was that there is no relevant federal or provincial regulation in place for our facility. There are other provinces that have implemented guidelines or standards, such as the often quoted Ontario standard of 1 odor unit at the property line or at the closest sensitive receptor. What we did find at a high level is that the only voluntary standards that we found, having surveyed those 10 or so largest communities in BC, exist in the Capital Regional District, where they have set a, as outlined by Jenny in her presentation, a design limit of 5 odor units at the property line and not detectable at the sensitive receptors. And so this, just a reminder, this facility is currently under construction, so not yet in operation. The second community of those 10 is Metro Vancouver. So they've set they have a more stringent standard set for their North Shore facility, which is under construction, and their Northwest Langley facility. So they've set a no detectable odor at sensitive receptors for that new plant and the upgraded plant. And then for the rest of their facilities, they've got a 5 odor unit at the property line and minimally detectable, which, you know, as Jenny highlighted, is would likely, you know, lead to future dispute about what exactly that means. So not necessarily an easily quantifiable metric. So I mean, our key takeaway from the work that we've done to date is that there is more work to do to really be able to draw conclusions from looking at the other jurisdictions in BC. So that's what we propose to do, is to go away with a longer list of questions, a longer list of information points that we would get from each of these jurisdictions, and bring those back to you with an analysis. And so some of the additional types of information that we'd be looking at is just really nailing down what types of treatment processes they have and how that compares to ours, what type of complaints or frequency that they're experiencing around their facilities, whether they have any planned upgrades or plans or are being pushed towards standards, establishing a standard as we may be here. What are the prevailing winds and other geographical features which might play into either causing or preventing odor issues around their facilities, and what, if any, odor monitoring or dispersion modeling they've done around their facilities. So that's information that we did not get in our first run, but which we plan to do and bring back to support a recommendation early next year.
Chris, we have a question from Director Hamir.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is around that 5 odor unit number that you have up. Could you explain to me what the difference between a design limit is and an actual running limit? Is there, in your understanding, a difference? Because it seemed from the presentation earlier that a design limit is something very different than what an operational, like at the property line unit is.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's a relatively new concept to myself as well. But the way I understand it is that the 5 odor unit in that case is a hard and fast limit, and that they're striving for significantly better performance at the property line. But that in the event of some type of operational disruption or some coming out of equilibrium at their treatment process, that they have provided themselves some
like a 5
some
as the
buffer
max.
there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Go
that's
ahead.
kind of what I understood, that 5 would be acceptable at in an emergency, like a power outlet, like a power outage. That 5 at the property line would happen on those very rare occasions, but that as a operating limit, it would be 1 at the property line. Whereas it seems like we are not operating under that limit as it is, whereas we've exceeded 5 just in a regular day-to-day operation. So we're not even at that either Metro or McLaughlin level.
Are you talking about the Capital Regional District or the Vancouver?
Both of them. Both of them. So they both have that 5 odor unit as a design limit in case of an emergency, but on day-to-day running, that it needs to not exceed 1 at the sensitive receptors.
So are both those plants up and running? Is that?
Neither of them are. The only one that is covered by either of those bullets is the recently upgraded Northwest Langley treatment plant, but the North Shore plant in North Vancouver is under construction, as is McLaughlin Point. But certainly point taken, and I think we do make a statement at some point in the report that odors, that the dispersion modeling highlights that odors are likely still unacceptably high at the facility. It's not so much that we're not disputing that. We're saying before we make a recommendation on a path forward in terms of additional infrastructure, we should be really sure. So that's the principle behind these recommendations.
And I have a question from, is that satisfactory? Yeah. I have a question from Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. And sorry for almost coughing up a lung there earlier and causing some distraction. I'm wondering how confident you are that covering the bioreactors, if we were to do that, would virtually eliminate the odor. Could we still have a problem after covering the bioreactors, or would your response kind of require more data? Are we confident that would solve the problem, I guess, is my question.
So what the study work that we have to, that would allow me to speak to that are both the 2016 and 2019 studies by RWDI, and in both cases, the results are fairly consistent at predicting odor levels significantly below 1 odor unit at the sensitive receptors with covering of the bioreactors. So based on the information we have, it seems that we would be confident in saying that odor units would be reliably below 1 odor unit with covering of the bioreactor.
So that's pretty reliable information. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, so last slide, just timing and next steps. So if this path or this approach is supported today by the Sewage Commission, we would undertake that additional work. So the further research into the jurisdictions, the additional odor sampling and revised dispersion modeling, and working with the CRRA on development of the draft good neighbor agreement. In February, late January, early February, we would bring forward those recommendations supported by the additional strengthened analysis. And this is being driven, I guess this timeline is being driven by our strong desire to have this resolved before we finalize that the next 5-year financial plan to resolve any uncertainties. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the report, of course, the presentation, and helping us understand the situation more. Sure. Director Hamir.
So, Chris, I'm still, I guess, struggling with the recommendations and the data that we've already received on why you think further research is needed. If we're not meeting the Ontario standards as it is, and if, through your survey of other wastewater treatment plants like Metro or McLaughlin Point, we're not meeting that 5 odor unit design limit, why would we spend more time looking at other jurisdictions? We've noted that we're already beyond that. I'm just wondering if this commission could save some time and money in not going down that road any further and start to make decisions based on I know we have small amounts of data, but the data already show that we exceed 5 odor limits at the sensitive receptors. How much more do you need to see?
And sorry, I'd also like to it's not just about obviously the odor units. There is a big question about the $8 million as well. So I would say that
Sure,
that's
and I'll come
certainly
back
a
to that
factor.
question too, but
For sure.
specifically for that one part of the recommendation.
So I'll just pass it
yeah.
to staff. I think
Yeah.
they understand the question.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention, Chair, please, that this type of decision requires a financial plan decision. That is the decision that through which the commission needs to make this commitment. So we have the time in advance of consideration of the five-year financial plan, and we would like to take this time to better inform the board, to bring this or the commission, bring these matters forward for them for their benefit, because this is an $8.5 million decision that requires a financial plan amendment, and it would be through that process. I think also we have the benefit of the CRA's input, and we have always tried to listen and model our actions through their advice, and definitely they have brought forward some information that requires further investigation for us to share with the commission before they make such a decision.
Okay, and I welcome that relationship with the CRA, but I would just advise if we know that we're not doing well, I'm not sure where best to put the resources of this commission. The second question I had was, the options analysis to look at other alternatives other than covering the bioreactor. I know odor has been on the topic of this commission for many, many years. And I'm trying to think, what options do you think there might be out there that wouldn't have shown up in this, coming up to this point? I guess I don't know if I'm asking you about things that you don't know, but
I think
is there...
I can speak to, I think both questions are related. So if I can link it to your first question about, to your point, we know we're exceeding 5 odor units at some of the sensitive receptors, and that we've acknowledged in the report that it's likely unacceptable. But then on the flip side, we have this prediction both by both sets of dispersion modeling that covering the bioreactor, which we now understand is a very significant cost for the service, would be expected to keep the odor units down at 0.5 or so at those sensitive receptors, which is a fairly big step in terms of reduction in odor. So that's what's driving us. Is there an alternative solution that could get us down to a defensible odor profile from the facility that doesn't bring us so far down to half an odor unit? So that's what's driving the point, and really the assumption that one odor unit, so the Ontario standard is the appropriate standard here, isn't necessarily reflected by the research we've done. The two largest municipalities or kind of jurisdictions in BC have set odor standards which are somewhat in alignment with the Ontario standard, but there's a range of other facilities which haven't. So we want to understand why and where they're going in those jurisdictions.
And do those other facilities have homes so close to, within 20 meters?
Yes, some of them do, some of them don't. Many of them don't. So I think we had a discussion today about when we do bring the results of that particular analysis back, we'll be focusing in on those jurisdictions that have facilities with residents, with homes in close proximity, because the other ones, clearly aren't of real relevance here. Yeah.
Okay, and I guess last sort of maybe question slash statement.
We do have some other people. Just
okay, just to the rest of the commission is, I think just from hearing both Chris's presentation and Jenny's, it doesn't look like, from the history of what we've done, that we've been able to reach an acceptable level of odor control for the residents of Curtis Road. I think if there was a technology out there, I know our staff would have found it by now. And I would be saddened to think that we don't think that going from where we are now to 0.5 is worth it. So just on behalf of, the Curtis Road folks, I think it is part of our duty to really work towards an acceptable level for just our good neighbor agreement. For us to have switched, our language prior to this had always been the Ontario standard, and it seems a little bit odd that we have switched to a different, or looking at other standards when 2017 and prior to that, that was the standard that we were talking to.
Thanks, Director Hamira. And we also have Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I have a couple of questions, and it's possible this is my first day here that they may have been covered, so they may be quite quick. So do I understand that because of the scale of borrowing required, if action were to be taken, that it would not be possible to commit any earlier than the March timeframe that was on the slide where you talked about further study and options coming back, and then March? I guess my point is, am I right that further study would not actually delay implementation of that plan if it were to be chosen? So it's not like it could be done tomorrow, but it won't be, because either way it would be in that time frame. Okay.
That was a simple yes?
That's
That's a simple yes. Okay, Greg.
I nodded my head.
This is going well. There are two more questions.
Okay.
And I guess I also I can see value in exploring technologies that somehow fall in between doing nothing and spending 8.5 million as it is. And I guess I wanted to know more about the benefits, though, of sampling, of doing further samples, and I was wondering if we have a rough idea of what that further sampling would cost, just in terms of where we're putting our resources.
Yes, so that you're on the order of $20,000 to undertake more sampling and rerun the dispersion modeling. And what that would do would be to provide us a data point outside of the summertime. So right now, all three of the data points we have are in June, August, September, in that summer period, when the facility actually runs on 2 bioreactors rather than 3. So that is a, and I didn't mention that in the presentation, but that's something that we've done for the last 3 years, starting actually in 2016. So that sample captured the first year where we did that change. So because the base flows in the summer are so much lower than in the rest of the year, we trialed it that year, and it was quite effective in helping us maintain our effluent quality, because the summertime, without any dilution of groundwater and rainwater, is the time of year where the incoming wastewater is the most concentrated. So what we've done for the last 3 years is go from 3 bioreactors down to 2. So all of this sampling has happened in those conditions. So that's one of the arguments for undertaking another set of samples at various times of day during a time of year where we have 3 bioreactors in place.
Okay, so during the winter time, because there are more bioreactors in place, just so make sure I'm grasping this, one would expect a lower degree of odor at that in the non-summer months. Is that correct? That's possible, likely. That's the expectation.
It depends on the extent of the rainfall that's led up to that point in time, but that's likely the expectation.
Okay, thank you.
And on the question. Sorry.
No,
were you going to follow up? I was going to say on the question of how fast could we potentially move if we just wanted to throw caution to the wind, and is waiting till a few more months. Is it impossible to move faster than that anyways?
It's not recommended. This is a huge decision, and $8.5 million that ultimately will require an amendment to your financial plan. You're about to embark on that process. Why not undertake a decision on $8.5 million or something close to that, or a portion of that, on the full spectrum of costs and projects that you have on the go? That's staff's recommendation.
That's clear. Thanks so much.
And just.
Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
That's okay. I just, to clarify, was Chair Frisch's question roughly similar to my first one, that confirms that whether further study is undertaken or not, that one would need to be waiting until the 5-year financial plan was being
Like if we made
confirmed.
a decision today or made a decision in January or March, is there a huge difference?
I think we're both trying to get at the same thing, and I just want to confirm I understood that it would not.
Did make a decision today what we could advance.
So financial plan aside, then yeah, an extra 2 or 3 months would provide us that much, would provide a solution 2 or 3 months sooner. So it's directly proportional to the extra time that we're taking here. And that's, like I said, aside from issues related to the financial plan. So we're coming to the end of the existing, the first year in the existing plan. So the expense of covering the bioreactors or some other additional odor control approach has not been included in the existing plan. The next plan will be approved in late March.
So we'd be waiting until late March, no matter what the decision was. Okay, great, thanks. I appreciate the clarifying.
And Director Arnott.
Yeah, thanks. I guess my question's been answered a bit because it was the financial question. But, we've been sitting here for a year and we've really heard from the CRRA and heard, we listened. You're not Jenny, you're Jenny. Yeah, and we heard, and I think we're all empathetic with her, and we do want to do the right thing. I don't really take kindly to giving an arbitrary deadline by the middle of November that we got to do something. The CAO is correct in saying that this is a huge financial cost for us that we need to make sure we flesh out properly. And if we're going to be ostracized in the community and the press and who knows where else, let it happen. But we need to make a decision as a group because this affects my taxpayers in Comox. This is going to affect the taxpayers in Courtenay. And I'm not saying it's bad that we do this. I'm going to vote in favor of spending that money. But I want to see a proper report. And I don't want to be scared into making a decision because people are going to go to the press in 2 weeks' time. Let it happen. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Director. I think your points are well taken, and certainly it is important that we make a wise decision here, not a rushed decision. Are there any more questions while we're on receipt? And we have Chris at the mic. Okay, all in favor of the report? And any opposed? That's unanimous. Thanks very much. And we have some recommendations. Would anyone, before we actually move recommendation 1, I wonder if we could add in a D to that, and that would be the cost implication and tax implications, and I presume you would do that anyways, but when the report comes back, I wonder if it, if there are any other ideas that come up, if we could start talking about, well, how much money do we have in reserves? How much, what would it take if we wanted to implement something that cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million and that sort of thing.
Great, and for Jake's benefit, then D includes a cost analysis with respect to the 2 partners, Comox and Courtenay, that are participants in the service.
That's
and
correct.
Their stake and their ratepayers, basically.
Yeah, if we could include that in that, I would appreciate it. And I don't know if anyone's. Thank you very much. Are there any thoughts or questions on that? I don't see any. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. And moving on to the next recommendation. Okay, are there any conversation on that? Pretty straightforward. I think that's something that we've wanted to do, and I'm glad to see that we're going to move forward on it. All those in favor? And that's also unanimous. And would someone be willing to read the in-camera recommendation? You just want to move it? It's basically going in camera to deal with negotiations related to possible services. And that's fine. Any discussion on that? No? Okay, all those in favor? Thank you very much, and that's unanimous. And we will then go in camera right now.
Yeah. Still think you'll be a quiet one.